Up to now, we've only talked about power and money. And some of you might at this point ask, well, wait a minute, aren't these revolutions in France and in the United States also supposed to be about ideas, about freedom, about self-governance, about the autonomy of individuals, and how the state is supposed to be based on individual rights and constitutional provisions? Yes, it is also about ideas. So let's look at the ideas, and of course the most important set of ideas that make the revolutions so powerful and so influential. Both the French and the American are based on the philosophical current of the Enlightenment. What is the Enlightenment? In the 18th century, this is a fairly amorphous and varied group of philosophers. However, they agree on the assumption that human reason, the capacity, the capability of people to think for themselves, must be the basis for all philosophical inquiry, for claims to religious and spiritual truth, and for political power. Nothing that you can run by people to get their understanding and agreement can be considered valid. You can't just push something on somebody by saying, we know it's better for you, and you can possibly understand this, but rather, ideally, what people believe and what their organized power, the state, does must be derived from the reasoning of the people. The people must discuss the matters, must understand them, must formulate their interests and come up with a solution that is based on their own understanding. And what follows from this basic assumption of reason as the source of legitimacy, of ideas and of institutions, is that because everybody has that capacity for reason, never mind the fact that maybe because of their education or the limitations imposed on them ideologically through their religion, they're not using reason to their full extent, but the capacity, the fact that you have the capability of thought, of reasoning, that establishes that all people are equal, period. No matter what your religion, no matter what your race, no matter what your nationality, no matter your gender, skin color, and so forth, everybody has this capacity. So that really is a radical departure from the world of the early modern era, where inequality is a big part of what defines how people relate to each other. Nobody is equal to anybody else. There's always hierarchy, where some people are better and others are mean and in subjection, to quote John Winthrop. And therefore also freedom, because if what defines you as an individual is that you are equal and that you are as equally endowed with your capacity for reason as anybody else, you need to have the freedom to make use of that reason freely, as much as you want to, within the limit of the laws. But of course, the laws are also part of what you do. You're involved in making them, because the government is a rational government based on equality, and it belongs to you. So these are roughly the ideas that inform these revolutions. And they are formulated by different philosophers. In France, the cradle of the Enlightenment, you might have heard about Voltaire and Rousseau, who think about religion, politics, education, and how you would set up these things based on these fundamental assumptions. Scottish Enlightenment has various representatives, but one of the more important ones here is Adam Smith, who was a moral philosopher and is considered the father of modern capitalism through his work, The Wealth of Nations, that he published in 1776. And then there is an important strand in Germany of the Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Schiller, Johann Wolfgang Goethe, poets and philosophers who, in distinction to especially the Scottish Enlightenment, you might have heard of Hume, who was very much convinced that philosophy must be based just on empirical facts, whereas for the German Enlightenment, human thought and what we do with these facts, the logic, the ethics that go into that, are also a legitimate part of a belief system, of a thought and philosophical system that is based on the assumptions of reason. And all these different strands compete with each other, talk to each other, are received by people who are eagerly reading about them through books, newspapers, and other reading material that you would find in your neighborhood coffee house and that you would hear read out loud by other patrons there. Remember, it's not like everybody can afford to buy their own newspaper, so the coffee houses where you get together to consume all these drugs that the slaves produced, while you're building communities with your fellow citizens and you develop radical notions of freedom and equality, Enlightenment philosophy and the political and religious writings that are derived from it, that is the fare that you're going to be consuming alongside your coffee and tobacco. And because not everywhere everything people think up can be discussed freely in public, there are also now secret societies, radical republicans, in other words, people who want to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic instead. Freemasons, a group of people that is made up of mid-level administrators who work for the king and therefore can't talk about how they want the government to be changed, who have to meet in secret with secret handshakes and meeting places simply so they don't get arrested. So here is, in other words, groups organizing going on, where people are not just getting these ideas of the Enlightenment as individuals, they're getting them always as being part of something, as a group of people in a coffee house, as members of a secret society, and of course also increasingly as craftsmen in the same guild, as merchants in the same trade, and so forth. Just as there are different philosophical currents that make the Enlightenment, so the reception of these different ideas differs by the social group that receives them. So the merchants, the monarchs, and the people's enlightenment are the three main strands I want to distinguish here. In other words, here the question is, what do the non-philosophers, what do the people do with the ideas of the Enlightenment? How do they dangle them into shape to suit their own interests and notions? One of the most important groups to find stuff in the Enlightenment for them are the merchants. And they are, thanks to this Atlantic trade, thanks to slavery, the most powerful group that there is at this point, equal probably to the kings in terms of the money that they have, and in many places more equal than the kings. The merchants, who so far have done well with the taxation, with the money that they send off to the king to pay for the navies that protect their fleets and their property from piracy and competitors, are never satisfied with the amount of money that they're making. The way that they're committed to capital accumulation means that they always want the freedom to make more money. So if somebody offers them a philosophical system based on freedom, the first thought that they have is he must be talking about the freedom to make money, and lots of it and more of it. And while it is nice to be able to exploit Africans, if you're a merchant, on a plantation, take their labor for free and then sell what they make to Europeans, how much nicer would it be to also exploit Europeans? They're so much closer by, and you can take their labor without having to involve ships and trade and all that cost. But you can't invest in manufacturing in Europe because all the manufacturing is done in these heavily regulated, protected guilds that are all about the livelihood of the people who are working there. If only you could set up a factory that produces stuff that craftsmen in guilds currently make, and if you could produce it more cheaply, with people who have none of the rights that a craftsman in a workshop had, how great would that be? So if you could use the ideas of the Enlightenment to explain to people how the institutions that on which the moral economy of the traditional order is based are really restrictive, are really tyrannical and arbitrary, not in keeping with ideas of reason and freedom, then you might just succeed in dismantling this old moral economy and opening up this whole field of investment. For the monarchs, for the governments, there is also appeal in making laws more rational, in recognizing that the individual has the freedom to make money, and that the king has to explain why he is doing things and how he is using the money, if as the end result of these reforms you end up with more money in your treasury, because that means you're going to have more power than other kings in Europe. So in order to investigate how the Enlightenment might be useful to become better at being absolutist monarchs, many kings across the board, and they differ to what degree that they actually trust these commoners who are influenced by the Enlightenment, but everywhere there's at least experimentation with taking on board well-educated commoners who are influenced by the Enlightenment and asking them to revise the rules and the procedures of the monarchy. And Goethe, who I mentioned, the German philosopher and poet and writer, becomes the chief minister, in essence, of a very small central German principality centered around the city of Weimar, where he gets to do that, where he gets to remake the state with the monarch on top, but below that level, to remake the state along the lines of reason and freedom and so forth, and to change the laws to make everybody freer and more able to express their ideas. The only safeguard still left in place in case this goes badly is it still remains a monarchy, and the monarch, the king, or the prince in his case, can pull the plug at any moment. Another big appeal for the monarchy in taking on board personnel and ideas out of the Enlightenment is that it might give them an edge to dismantle competing power centers in society. And I'm not just talking about the guilds. If you remember, the problem that the British and the French kings had after the 7 Years' War was they were reminded that their aristocrats, their nobility, have the right to tell them, no, you can't have our money, you can't tax us. So clearly the nobility is a separate power center in society that competes with the king and that has rights against the king that the king can't do anything about, both in France and in England. So if you can reform the makeup of the state and of the society to take away the power of the nobles, the kings would be extremely happy with that. In fact, in many cases, the nobility have been a thorn in the side. I was going to say pain in the ass, but you can't do that in a lecture like this, for the kings from the high Middle Ages onward. And if you do that, if you reform your laws to make them more rational, to base them on reason and freedom, and if you get rid of the power of the nobility, what you end up with is a system of laws that is much more in line with a future market economy, where people can act as self-interested individuals economically, and therefore you can get unlimited, or at least much less limited, capital accumulation.